It's an annual gig for us to offer a teach-in on King Day and a teach-in on Juneteenth. And what we're trying to do is to just honor that if we're going to be in this revolution, then we need to be learning some skills along the way, right? We can't just be talking about revolution. We need to learn some skills along the way. So I wrote a paper and sent it to Natalie. I don't always write a paper, but sometimes the Ph.D. Jacqui likes to write a paper. And this paper is Freedom Now, Raising Fierce Love. Freedom Now, Raising Fierce Love. And I'm going to ask Ben to put it up as a PDF for us when we get through with today. Just going to start at the top with a couple of highlights so that we can get to a conversation with Natalie at the 1:20 mark, okay? And we'll wrap at 1:30 per promise, yes? So one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is, "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice." Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Love correcting everything that stands against love. Dr. King did not think of love as a nammy-pammy, squishy, codependent moment, but rather a force, and I agree. The Reverend John Jenka, who I happen to be married to, said this recently: "Love has taken a back seat to rage, to resentment, to hatred, to violence, to bigotry. And the only antidote to this hot mess is fierce love." I've been thinking about my mother as my first pastor, how much I loved swinging as a child, getting in the swings with my sister Wanda. Felt like flying. I was never afraid. I'm not risk averse. So how hard could I pump my legs and how high could I swing? Yes, to the swing set pumping out of the ground. And a couple times I fell out of the swing because I'm a little crazy in those days. And I was thinking about my dad's kind of nurturing spirit on this Father's Day, picking me up and bandaging knees and saying, "Get back in the swing. You know, get back in the swing. You can do this. You don't be afraid." And that was really cool, but the best thing in the world was watching Mom do everything, anything. Powdering her face with the Too Light powder that disappeared into her skin. Ultimately, Dixie Peach powder, Too Light, became okay. Avon lipstick samples, hairspray, pink rollers, turning into a beautiful hairstyle. And what I learned to do was to watch Mom watch the world. In doing so, I took cues on how to look at the world around me. She made soup for sick neighbors. She stretched out the food on the dinner table for that latchkey kid who never had enough to eat. I learned watching her when to laugh, when to cry, how to feel about Kennedy and King being assassinated. Watching her was like reading a book on how to love my neighbor, the stranger, and the world as I loved myself. It's been 5 years since she died, but her face was a window to her feelings and therefore permission to feel mine. So I really miss that. Yeah. Especially as the way COVID continues to rampage itself around the globe and we're getting careless. 2 of our staff are out sick right now to COVID. The gun violence epidemic continues to terrorize our nation. There's been 63 mass shootings since Buffalo. And that was yesterday. So far, it's been 2 a day. It's unbelievable. And they're not all in the news.
Right.
In the news is a boy driving through a neighborhood with his white friend and getting accosted by adults. Get out of here. Sanford, Florida. Get out of the neighborhood. Get out of there. You don't belong here. It's unbelievable how tenacious racism is our nation. And as the January 6th Commission tells us more of the horror of that day, and the deniers continue to act like it was a protest. I don't have words. My grief is intense. And you know, Ben knows these words well. I'm sick and tired of the way Black grief is a threat and white rage is a sacrament. We are this nation. We are this nation where sometimes, Natalie, I feel like all of our children are a threat. Black ones, white ones, Latinx, indigenous, Asian children practice drills in their classroom. You've seen the interview, right, guys, of the man who survived the shooting in Uvalde? And let's honor our Spanish-speaking friends by saying Uvalde. He told his children to get under the desk and pretend to be asleep because that's what he was taught to teach them. And it left them sitting there as targets for this murderer. These parents who had to have their cheeks swabbed to identify their children, this is what's happening in our nation right now. And the fact that race is underneath the gun conversation and that we won't talk about it because we don't want to know it, that the militia, the so-called militia that needed to be armed with slave patrols to recapture my ancestors, the police, modern policing is a holdover, a legacy of that. Our gun laws is a legacy of that. And all it takes is wisdom and knowledge to know that, and that might change the way people think about guns, but we can't talk about it because it might change the way people think about guns. The God-given right to bear arms, as opposed to noticing and knowing that its legacy is stuck in white supremacy. We have the Klan because of white rage. We have the truth on this Juneteenth is that the day that those enslaved Africans were made free in Galveston, Texas, as they were leaving the plantation, many of them were murdered because their masters did not want them to be free. Better dead than free. Every time the universe moves toward freedom for blacks, the response is white violence. So you have an Emancipation Proclamation, and you have a Civil Rights Act. The first Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, was during Reconstruction. And then those white disenfranchised people who lost their way of life, refused those freedoms on the black folks. And so therefore a campaign of lynching and terror. And then again, when the universe moves toward freedom in the 60s and those civil rights acts, the response from white rage is another campaign of terror and violence. There are too many examples to cite in a short time, but I would suggest if you're listening, watching, you subscribe to the Equal Justice Initiative. They have a historic page every day, and every day you'll get in your inbox a note that you should know about what happened in history on that day. So you all have heard my story, that I was raced when I was in kindergarten. Most people know I was a kindergartner in New Hampshire when little Miss Lisa moved from Mississippi and stage whispered to my little white boyfriends, because they were only white boys to be friends with, "Why are you sitting next to that nasty N-word? Don't you know her mother, she gets chocolate milk from her mother's tits," or something like that. And whatever it was she said was so nasty, I didn't quite understand it. What? Milk comes out of tits? Who knew? And also, what's an N-word? Like, what? It was just too much, right? But I knew that it was ugly, and I knew it was meant to hurt me. And when I went to tell my mom and dad, they had two reactions. One was my mother was like, "That's so silly, and we're going to pray." And my father was, "That's so vile, I'm going to the base commander to demand reparations and an apology." And that's how you end up being Jacqui. Prayer and reparations. There we go. That's it right there. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to skip some of this now to just get to your story. When's the first time, your ears heard the N-word and knew that it was about you and knew that somebody thought you were nasty and less than and terrible and horrible because your skin is brown or black? or dark black? And when's the first time you, black friends, got it clear that you're cute for a little black girl? You and your sister are cute for black girls, for dark-skinned girls. How many times did you go to a party as a teenager as a dark-skinned black girl and the blue light is on you and you look linty and the boys think you're ugly because you're too dark, especially too dark in the blue light?
Where your teeth glow.
Where your teeth glow. Mm-hmm. So there's a way in which race has shaped my childhood and therefore my adulthood, because my childhood shapes my adulthood. And one of the things that I want Natalie and I to talk a little bit about is, having been shaped by race as black women, what's the legacy of that in our lives? How does that inform how we be grown-ups? And what would be what we wish would happen in parenting now across race and ethnicity, to raise up generations of children who will not race each other and who instead will heal the world? Natalie, I'm going to stop there and see if we can talk.
I took notes. You know me.
I know you did. I know.
I took notes.
Vanessa, I took some notes.
So the first thing that came to mind while I was hearing you talk is when you were talking about swinging. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't, I started to think about adventurous and assertive children. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's what I hear from you being like, and I was swinging, you were swinging for the fence. Like you were like, I know that's for baseball, but you know, like you were really, and what do your parents, right? What do black parents teach their children about who are assertive and adventurous versus what do white parents get to teach their children about being assertive and adventurous, right? Like, it just makes me wonder, Jacqui knows, I'm just gonna say this out loud, that one of my side effects of COVID that I've had twice is brain fog. So I'm not gonna remember names, but I know that you have an awesome memory, so. Yes. So I'm thinking like Tamir Rice right now, who's just being a kid outside playing, right? Playing with a toy gun, which that's a whole other conversation we can have, but in a way that you play, you know, just being a kid, like being adventurous and like doing the things that he sees, and it ends his life. Like that ends up getting, well, I don't want to blame it on the kid, but the actions of these police officers and how they see black bodies is translated differently because of an adventurous and assertive kid, right? All of the black children, there's so many countless, I don't even have to bother to tell you names, right? Because there's so many countless stories of teenagers who were stopped by police because they're driving their parents' car, or there's something on the windshield mirror, or whatever that, I don't drive, y'all, I don't know. Or, you know, like whatever, like there's a license thing, or something that ends up really violently because that kid is assertive and was like, why are you stopping me? And this doesn't make sense. And so I don't feel safe. I'm going to do something different. And then we end up with these stories. Now, y'all know good and well that there are also teenagers who, one, don't get stopped, who are white. And if they do get stopped and mouth off, there's a whole thing. A friend of mine loves to tell me a story about how she is a white female in, I want to say, North Carolina. So she's a white teenager. Would have the police bring her home. Like something would happen, they would get in trouble or whatever, and the police would be like, oh, they're just being kids. And, you know, so there's just there's a thing there for me about like how our kids, how it's insidious, right? How it's in the water that we swim in, and what particular children are allowed, how they're allowed to grow into their fullness of themselves.
I think that's such an important point you're making there, Nat. The news that is out now about a shooting in Chicago of a 13-year-old who was in a gas station, literally turned around, hands up, and the police still shot him. He's alive, but may never walk again. Shot him in the back. So shot him in the back, meaning he's turning again, meaning the the way black girls, remember a couple of years ago, the little girls that were at a swim party in a yellow bikini is all I can remember, the way they treated that baby girl like a woman. Black children are adultified and stigmatized and objectified and seen as the threat, whereas white children, and I'm just gonna do white for now, that same kind of behavior you're saying, Natalie, would be sort of like amplified and celebrated. My mom and dad were like, do not be sassy. Mm-hmm. Why? Because if you sass me, you're gonna sass somebody else and they're gonna kill you. Exactly right. My grandbabies, bless their hearts, are being taught to speak up. Like, what do you think? When I was a little kid, Nat, and I didn't have our analysis that we would have now as grown women, but I could see the difference between the kids in my high school's parents and my parents, the kids in my grammar school, mixed schools, both parents. My parents were like, sit down, shut up, be quiet. Their parents were like, Penelope, what would you like for dinner? You know, or what would you like to wear? These kinds of, and I want to say, y'all, short on time, this kind of parenting where children are taught to use their voice, to have a say, to be seen and heard, to have a choice, Cheerios or cornflakes, you know, math or geometry or science, those kinds of children grow up to be CEOs. They early learn to trust their voice, to trust their ingenuity, their creativity. They end up becoming CEOs, entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, because their parents fanned imagination. And if black parents are fanning imagination and their sassy child gets out of the car, that's their fear. That the child with the confident, imaginative child is the one that's going to mouth off to the cops. So look at how racism is going to keep repeating itself, so that the generations of children who will be the ones who feel confident and expressive and jump out there will not look like me.
Yep. And it's in our, I think that we have this idea that like once we change this generation, we'll be good, right? Like our children are learning different. The earliest memory I have about being raced was second grade, I think.
What happened?
We were watching this, I went to a private school, so there were a lot of mostly white children. My best friend was Greek.
Okay.
Kiki Giannakis.
Mm-hmm.
And we were watching something in second grade, and at this particular school, when we watched a little video, like a health thing or something, we got to choose wherever we sat in the classroom. You could watch it from wherever. And we chose to sit under our desks. I don't know, we were so excited to like lay on our desk and watch this thing. The beginning of the video, there was this little black boy who was like riding his bike somewhere. And she turned to me and she was like, oh, do you like him? And it had never occurred to me, first of all, I guess, to like people, okay, like whatever. But then like the second thing was, oh, I'm supposed to like him because he's the same color as me. I'm supposed to like him because he's black. So that was the first time that it occurred to me that I was supposed to be something different, right? Yeah. And luckily the earliest memory that I have is kind of innocuous. Like it didn't, as far as I know, do me any like ill harm, but it was a divider for me in that moment, and it had clearly been one for her for all this time that we had been besties, right? For 2 years of school, but even now, right, that's still happening. An example from Thursday, when I was in line in Harlem, in my little blackity black neighborhood. And it's, like Harlem, CVS, Duane Reade, Walgreens, y'all know, like, it was a Duane Reade and it was busy, which happens, right? You get to Duane Reade at a certain time in the day, it's gonna be on and popping. And behind me were 2 white teenage boys. And I am pretty darn clear that they are visiting, like staying at an Airbnb or something with their family. And they made a comment about how slowly it was moving in that Duane Reade. Oh, it's so slow, it's taking forever. And they're standing right behind me, and one of the guys says, CP time. And the other kid says, what does he say? I think Central Pacific time or something. Like he tries to make it a joke, like that's not really what we're talking about. So there's a way, this is what I mean. There's a way in which this thing is trying to be really insidious, right? They knew what they were doing. They knew they were surrounded by a lot of Black people, and they wanted to say this thing to each other, but couldn't let it rock. Right? They can't just say CPT surrounded by all these Black people. But they pretend it's about something else, like we don't know. Right? Like we're stupid, because that's one of the things, the arrogance of teenagers, God bless them, is that you learn a lot of things, you think you know the things. But so they were trying to, and so this is what I mean, like it's still a generation, even beneath that and beneath that and beneath that, that's being taught that there is a difference here between these people and us, you know?
Yeah. And I think what's really deeply troubling to me is the ways that it's different is stuck in the children of color too. It's very subtle, but it's in there. My little nephew is African American and Filipino, and both of the children just look more like, brown genes are strong, So the children look more like me and like us, like our color and features, actually. But their mom is Filipino, their dad is Black, and RJ plays on a basketball team with Filipino boys. So I'm going to go there, too. Filipino people have quite generously drunk of the white supremacy Kool-Aid, right? So it took Rodney's father-in-law forever to accept him. But the little Filipino kids sometimes treat RJ like he's not quite them, because he's not quite them. And that is inside him as colorism, right? And think of all of the little Black children who live in integrated spaces. I think that's harder than Black children who live in all Black spaces. I think in the all Black space, Ruby Sales might say there's a kind of village of protection, and no matter our class, no matter our earning power, no matter our vocation, whatever, this Black village is loving on all the kids. But I think when Black children are adjacent sometimes to white or Latinx, Greek, Asian, I think sometimes there's more wounding inside the soul, because there's more, there's an adjacent comparison. It's in your face in a way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, as we've all worked on here at Middle, like it's an approximation thing, right? And the goal is not to be Black. So in and this goes back to like even the beginnings of, I'm just going to say the beginnings of our country. Let's start there, right? Like how far away can I get from this one group that I know is despised, right? So everybody else wants to be white, So then I am curious about the children who end up in the liminal space of that, like in the middle, betwixt and between. My nieces who are here in New York this weekend, walking around with their very Black auntie and daddy, and one who, doesn't really like her curly hair or thinks it's frizzy, or you know what I mean?
Right.
So there's just like I think maybe a confusion, is that the right word? Around how to be fully who they are, like I heard you talking about your grandchildren who are like, what box do I check? Like, how do I claim all of the things that make me up, right? And part of that is just like, what information gets out and how does it get to places, Yeah.
And the information piece, right, Nat, is there are so many books, from Lupita Nyong'o's book, which I'm not going to say the title, but look it up. There's only one her. Beautiful book of her chocolatey child self and what it meant for her to be in a family where there are different shades of Black, and how she comes to understand that her Black is so incredibly beautiful. Books like that, the book I wrote, You Are So Wonderful, with multicultural cast of kids. There are beautiful books now by Black men for Black boys, and claiming their space and their power. So just go to books for Black children and you will find that. However, there has to be an equal response in parents who are not Black. So I'm thinking about Asian parents acknowledging the history of racism between Asians and Blacks. If you're listening and you're Asian, like there are decades of dissonance, of conflict between Asian people and Black people. Like, why? Can we think about that together? Can we think about that together and work to dismantle that? Because if it's inside you, your child is going to pick it up. I mean, I'm watching my mom for cues, and I'm getting the message. Mommy was Black from Mississippi and walked past the school to go to the colored school and crossed streets from white people and like, I can't look you in the eye. But something inside her was, I am not going to teach my children racism or prejudice. Like, I am not going to teach my children that white people are the devil. I'm not going to teach my children to look at white people and be afraid. She was intentional about raising us to love all the people. Daddy got a little more anger. We'll come back to that. But Mom was very intentional about, here's what it looks like, these are your friends, let me set a table, etc. White parents need to do the same kind of thing for their children if they want to be in the movement for love and justice. What are you going to expose your child to? What kind of books are they going to read that are about Black people? Get a Black doll. You know, get some Black G.I. Joes. Get some Black books. Get some Black puzzles. Take your child to Black museums. And not mixed, there's some overcoming to do, you know? So like, to steep your child in jazz, in blues, in gospel music, jazz as the only really American music. I think there's a whole curriculum that needs to happen for parents that are not Black to raise revolutionary children who understand that this world is diverse and you need to be a part of it because you've learned early how to own it. I think does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I went to DC, what was that, last weekend?
Yeah.
For the March for Our Lives, and went to
The museum there.
Yeah, National Museum of African American History and Culture. And this is my third time going. I try and go once a year, but because of the pandemic, a couple years I haven't been able to go. And I was blown away at the mix of attendees.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different than when I went before, and I applaud that.
Yeah, you saw more parents, non-Black parents there? Yeah.
There was a lot of white folks in that museum, just period. A lot of white folks. And I was like, okay, well, look, we're doing a thing. I really appreciated that. Yeah. And I would add to that, because they are doing this whole thing where they're trying to teach the thing, as you're saying, and exposing them to the thing. And I think the other side of that, or in addition to what we're already saying about adventurous and assertive children, is when you arm them with knowledge, right? Also arm them with, and they already are in this assertive space. If you are raising a white child specifically, how do you help them know how to use that assertiveness in a way that can be helpful for dismantling systems when they see them in front of them, or at least questioning the system? Like, how can they say, you know what, I have a lot of Disney princesses that are white. Are there any that aren't? Or or whatever, you know what I mean? Like very, very easy examples that are happening because it's just the water we swim in, right?
That's really good. Yeah, that's good. I definitely cribbed off of Amanda's Raise Imagination when I was thinking about raising fierce love. Trying to write, so this book, y'all, my book has a chapter in here that could be good for families and thinking about this, but I think what Nat is pointing to is a kind of hermeneutic or something to give our children to suspect anything that looks like injustice, to have a critique of what looks like injustice, to help your child value diversity. They're watching you. So if all your friends are white and all your white friends are trying to talk about race, if you live in an all-white neighborhood or send your child to an all-white school, If your child is in an all-white church, I'm saying no matter what you say, what you do will raise a hermeneutic of suspicion about all white spaces. Our friend Rob Stevens, if it's an all white space, we should suspect it. So I think that's a thing. I think also setting a table as young as they are to know color and talk about color. We don't want a colorblind society.
No.
That's not what we're talking about. So your child is already saying, oh, Kiki, was that her friend? Kiki has a certain kind of hair or a certain kind of skin color. Describe Kiki for me. Oh, it sounds, what kind of food does Kiki's family serve? What kind of music do they listen to? Foster an imagination of welcome by not pretending that all the things are the same, but instead evoking, because they're going to know it and ascribe meaning to it. So why not have them ascribe your meaning to it? Sounds like that red-haired boy was back outside again. Ask him what's his favorite dinner. Let's make his favorite dinner. Like small things like that start building a kind of imagination of a world of diversity. I'm looking at you like, did you want to add something right there?
I do. I just was really thinking about Kiki,
who also was, because she was brown, like she wasn't, fair-skinned. She was brown and she had like long dark hair, and I'm just now thinking about how she existed at that school, because we were probably a very few number of darker children, right? And where did she feel like she ever fit? And just her asking that question, would she have ever seen herself in that same health little movie that we watched, was there ever going to be somebody who looked like her, or you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's just fascinating to me. I'm also thinking about something else you talked about in when we make any moves towards dismantling, there's always like a backlash of white violence, and how we see it very easily when it's lynchings, or when it's like when there's danger attached to it that's obvious. We don't see it as easily when it's like, let's erect this statue, let's name this school, you know what I mean? Those are all still very violent things that are rooted in whiteness and white supremacy, and holding, staking our claim and holding tight. And it's all operates, me and Jacqui like to talk about operating out of abundance rather than lack. And it's all out of this whole thing that's happening, I think, on a news entertainment channel that I shall not name, that's talking about, what is that phrase they're saying? The Great Replacement or something.
Oh yeah,
the Great Replacement theory.
Oh yeah.
That's operating out of a place of lack, right? That there's not enough.
There's not enough.
The pie, it's not pie, right? There's enough for all of us. We're not going to run out, but that's based on there being an abundance for them at all times, and now having to reconcile with, oh, I should have been sharing all along,
It is really hard to think about when things are scarce.
Yes.
How we feel about Black people being successful.
Paradise Square, hello.
Yeah. Everybody saying amen, right? And go see the show Paradise Square. If when things are tight, Black women's, I was thinking about Viola Davis and that video that's gone around about her, where they're saying, you're like the Black Meryl Streep.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, it's great. Just do Viola, Meryl Streep. And she's like, well, if I am the Black Meryl Streep, pay me. Pay me. And I really am I'm not talking about I need to get paid more. I'm really saying Black success threatens white power. That's what I'm saying. And Black women's success threatens white power more. Because the man's supposed to make a little more money because he's got it, whatever. So all of these things, right? All of these snippets, all of these are snippets, anecdotes in a way, of something that is systemic and pernicious. And what we wanted to do today was to just scratch a little surface, just scratch the surface on what it would be like to raise a revolution grounded in fierce love for white parents and Black parents and Indigenous parents, and Latinx Hispanic parents and Asian parents to collude together to cease and desist, not talking about race at the kitchen table. Talk about race at the kitchen table. Talk about color at the kitchen table. Ask your child to say, what did you notice today on the news? You know, pick a thing to watch that is age appropriate. Look at Encanto. You know, that is the best. I could watch that every day. But the panoply, I can't say the right, is that the right word? Panoply of colors of Hispanic folks, the chocolatey man that speaks Spanish, and the light-skinned woman that speaks Spanish. That movie is meant to teach something about color and race. Watch it with your child and say, let's talk about what you saw. Don't pretend like your child isn't getting cues from commercials, from music, from books, from teachers on the playground about race. You might as well be your child's race tutor.
Come on.
Because they're being tutored. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you would just take that on as part of being your child's pedagogue, your child's teacher, to give them a hermeneutic about race as something beautiful created by God. Or better, there's one race called human, but the ethnicities are created by God as something to delight in.
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
All right. More soon. We're going to be talking about this all the time because that's how we roll. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you all.